There are so many interesting individuals that we find in the scriptures in both the Old and the New Testament. They always have different personalities. They strike you in different ways. And I've always been intrigued, especially with the person of St. Peter, whom we hear in the gospel tonight. He is considered the first pope, if you wish, and it was upon Peter that Jesus chose to build his church. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. So Jesus entrusted, we're told, to him the keys to the kingdom, and he gave him the power, as he was a representative of Jesus on earth, to bind and to loose, and the same would be bound and loosened in heaven. But what always stood out for me regarding Peter was that he was not a perfect disciple. He was not a perfect disciple, a perfect apostle. If you read the scriptures and all of the gospels, he struggled and often fell in his desire to follow Jesus. He became one of the great apostles upon whom the church was built, always referred to as this great follower, and yet he struggled in that journey to follow the Lord. For example, when Jesus predicted his passion and death, Peter was the one that tried to turn him away from that mission, to keep him from doing what he was called to do. He was also, in the gospel, called this rock, on who I will build my church, and later on, Jesus, in one incident, calls him Satan. Now from being rock, solid, now you're Satan. You are an obstacle to me, Jesus said to him. Recall Peter trying to walk in the angry sea and almost drowning, losing trust in God. Or recall Peter wanting to set up tents on Mount Tabor and to stay there, not to go down and begin the mission, but let's stay here. This is kind of cool. Let's stay here and relax. Who can forget how Peter showed great courage in the gospel in striking a soldier with a sword and cutting off his ear in order to defend Jesus? And then only a few hours later, that same Peter denied the Lord 3 different times. So Peter, as great as he was, struggled on the journey, had to go through some difficult times. The person of Peter, for that reason, I think, gives me hope. Because like Peter, I know that I am not always a perfect disciple of Jesus. I have over my life fallen often and stumbled as I tried to be a faithful priest and baptized Christian. And I think many of us could say the same thing about our journey of life. But God has still used me in my weakness and has allowed me to serve and help build the church of God. Even though Peter often failed, he had the courage to recognize his failures, to learn from his mistakes. In his weakness, he learned that he needed to turn to God, and there he would find forgiveness. Pretty much the story of all of us. That at some point in our life, as we've struggled, we've known that somehow God would still forgive us. And that gave us courage to make that turnaround. Peter was not afraid to admit his failings and his weakness, and that allowed him to see what others could not see. If we follow Peter's example and humbly admit our limits and our mistakes, we, like Peter, can become more patient, become more compassionate, and more open. There should be no shame in admitting our weaknesses. It can really lead us to the truth that we depend on God. That without Jesus in our lives, we're going to continue to stumble. It can allow us to recognize that Jesus is our Savior. And so admitting our weakness allows us to come to that point, allows us to know that we need to walk with the Lord, that he'll never leave us. What can be missed in this gospel account is the fact that Jesus gave Simon a new name in this story. He was Simon before this story in the gospel today, but he became Peter. He became Rock. He received this name after making a profession of faith. You are the Christ. When he could say, you are the Christ, he had a new name. He had a new destiny. He had a transformation in his life. And there began a transformation that would make him into one of the greatest of the apostles. This transformation, Peter, did not happen at once. And as we related a few minutes ago, it took a great deal of time for Peter to get there. Even after Peter receives his new name, he still is rebuked because he misunderstands the cross. Tries to talk Jesus out of going in his mission. He fumbled at the Last Supper, didn't want his feet to be washed. Refusing to let Jesus wash his feet was a way of him saying that I don't need your forgiveness. And it was later we know that he denied Jesus 3 times. And when he could accept Jesus, he began to be transformed. Despite those failures, Jesus always stayed committed to Peter. Didn't give up on him. He could have. He could have said, oh, Peter, you're way too much. You're too much of a problem. I'll get somebody else. No, he didn't give up on him. The same can and should be said about us. God called us by name at baptism. Many of us took a new name when we were confirmed. And that was the beginning, if you wish, of our transformation, our becoming more and more his faithful follower. We may not always live as we should, but God still calls us. God doesn't give up on us. If we allow it, God continues to transform us more and more into his image and likeness. Jesus never quit on Peter. He loved him to wholeness and allowed him to become the great disciple that we remember him as. The gospel today began with Jesus asking Peter, asking the other apostles, who do you say that I am? He moved the question away from who do other people say that I am? But he looked straight in their eyes to them and said, who do you say that I am? Maybe this week we could all make it our assignment to spend some time with Jesus in prayer, reflecting on that question. Spend some time with Jesus. Isn't that what prayer is all about? Spending time, listening, hearing what Jesus wants to say to us. And how do we describe in that time our personal relationship with Jesus? What do we think Jesus really feels about us? I think one thing the Lord may say is this: I need your help to build my church. Can I count on you?